At the BBQ, my wife joked, "Who wants to trade my husband? He's low maintenance but has no ambition." Her recently divorced neighbor smirked and said, "I'll take him." My wife's smile vanished when the neighbor added, "So, when should I pick him up?" I, 34, have spent the better part of a decade being the background character in my own marriage. If you saw me at a grocery store, you wouldn't look twice. I wear flannels from 5 years ago, I drive a modest truck that's paid off, and I work as a senior systems architect from my home office. In the eyes of my wife, 32F, that made me a failure. To her, if you aren't constantly stressed, wearing a suit, and talking about disrupting the market, you're basically standing still. She's a marketing director, or she was, and her entire personality is built on the concept of the hustle. The problem with people who worship the hustle is that they eventually run out of their own money to fuel it. The BBQ where everything imploded was 3 weeks ago. It was a typical Saturday in our upscale suburban neighborhood. My wife had spent the morning obsessing over the aesthetics of the fruit platters and making sure the lawn looked like a golf course, not because she enjoys gardening, I'm the one who mows and edges, but because the neighbors were coming over and she needed them to be jealous. That was her fuel. We were standing near the smoker. I'd been up since 5 a.m. prepping a brisket. I was sweaty, I had a beer in my hand, and I was actually feeling relaxed for once. Then the conversation turned to career goals. Our neighbor, a guy who works in private equity, was bragging about his new Porsche. My wife's eyes were gleaming with that weird mix of envy and desperation she gets whenever someone else has something shiny. She laughed, but it was that sharp, brittle laugh that always preceded a jab at me. She put her arm around me, not affectionately, but like she was showcasing a piece of furniture she was thinking about donating. "Honestly," she told the group, "does anyone want to trade? I'm putting him on the market. He's low maintenance, I'll give him that. He's like a houseplant. You water him once a week and he just sits there. But God, the man has absolutely no ambition. I'm out here trying to break into the C-suite and he spent the last 4 hours obsessing over the internal temperature of a piece of meat." The group chuckled uncomfortably. I felt that familiar heat in my neck, but I didn't say anything. I've learned that arguing with her in public just gives her more material for her long-suffering wife routine. But then the new neighbor, a woman 35F, who had moved in across the street after a messy divorce, didn't just laugh. She was a sharp-eyed lawyer who had been watching us all evening. She stepped forward, looked me dead in the eye, and didn't look away. "I'll take him," she said. The music seemed to get quieter. My wife's hand dropped from my shoulder. "What?" "I'm serious," the neighbor said, her voice smooth and completely devoid of irony. "He's stable, he clearly handles the domestic load, he's got a high-paying remote gig that he doesn't feel the need to brag about, and he's actually present when you talk to him. That's a unicorn in this zip code. So when should I pick him up? Is tonight good, or do you need to pack him a bag?" My wife tried to turn it back into a joke, but her face was turning a shade of purple that matched her wine. "You think you've had one too many mimosas," she snapped. The neighbor just smirked and walked away toward the drinks table, but the damage was done. The trade was the only thing anyone talked about for the rest of the night. Once the last guest left, the mask dropped. My wife didn't even wait for the door to click shut. "You let her humiliate me," she screamed. She started throwing the leftover paper plates into the trash with enough force to rip the bag. "You're just standing there like a lump while she basically called me a bad wife." "You're the one who offered the trade," I said, keeping my voice level. "I was just standing by the grill. If you don't like the terms of the deal you pitched, don't pitch it." "You're pathetic," she hissed. "You have no idea what I do for this family. I have to maintain our image because you're too lazy to do it. We have a reputation in this neighborhood, and you're dragging it down by looking like a handyman at our own party." I walked away. I went to my office and locked the door. I didn't go there to pout. I went there to work, not on software, but on the digital paper trail I'd been following for the last month. See, I might be unambitious in my wife's eyes because I don't want a VP title, but I'm very ambitious when it comes to math, and the math in our joint checking account hadn't been adding up for a long time. A few months back, I noticed a dip in my credit score, just a few points. Most people wouldn't notice, but I keep a tight eye on my finances. I dug deeper and found something that made my blood cold. There were 2 credit cards I didn't recognize, one from a luxury department store and one from a major airline. Both had my name on them. Both were maxed out. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the HELOC, the home equity line of credit. Our house was a gift to me from my grandfather. He'd left it to me in a trust that transitioned into my name alone before we even got married. It was a non-marital asset. I'd kept it that way on purpose, paying for all the taxes and maintenance from my separate inheritance account. It was the one piece of ground I truly owned. My wife had tried to tap into it. She had forged my signature on a $100,000 credit line application. She needed the money to pay off the credit cards she'd opened in my name before I found out. She was chasing a lifestyle we couldn't afford to impress people she didn't even like. The next morning, I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I waited for her to leave for her Soul Cycle class, and then I drove across the street. I knocked on the neighbor's door. She opened it wearing a blazer, looking like she was ready for court. "Here for the pickup?" she joked, but then she saw my face. "Hey, you okay?" "I need a lawyer," I said. "A good one, and I think you know exactly why." She stepped aside and let me in. "I've been waiting for you to realize what was happening," she said. "I'm a real estate attorney. Your wife came to me 3 weeks ago. She wanted to know if there was a way to bypass a trust-held title for a loan. I told her no. She didn't like that answer." My stomach dropped. She tried to use you to help her forge the documents? She didn't call it forgery. She called it managing family assets. She's entitled, man. She really thinks because she's the one building the brand, your property is just a resource for her to use. I didn't tell you at the BBQ because I didn't know if you were in on it or if you were a victim. But after seeing her treat you like a dog in front of the neighbors, I figured it was the latter. Over the next 2 hours, we looked through everything. She showed me the emails my wife had sent her. My wife actually sent her a scanned copy of my grandfather's trust, asking for loopholes. It was cold, it was calculated, and it was very, very illegal. "Here's the thing," the neighbor told me. "You can file for divorce, but if you do it now, she'll try to claim half of everything as marital property. You need to nail her on the fraud first. If you can prove she was actively trying to defraud you and the bank, she
loses her leverage in the settlement. In this state, financial misconduct is a huge deal during a split." I went home and played the part. For the next 2 weeks, I was the perfect, unambitious husband. I cooked every meal. I cleaned the house. I even bought her a bottle of her favorite expensive wine. I wanted her to feel safe. I wanted her to think her plan was working. Meanwhile, I was working with a private investigator. We found out she wasn't just spending money on bags and shoes. She was funneling money into a business venture with a guy she'd met at a conference. It was a classic Ponzi scheme, and she'd fallen for it hook, line, and sinker. She was desperate to get that $100,000 because her investment was about to go belly up, and she'd used company funds from her marketing firm to get it started. She wasn't just a bad wife, she was a criminal. The house of cards collapsed on a Tuesday. I was sitting in the living room when she came home, looking frazzled. She dropped her bag and looked at me with that familiar look of disgust. "We need to talk," she said. She sat down across from me. "I've been thinking, this house, it's too big for us, and frankly, it's a waste of equity. I've already contacted a realtor. We're going to list it, take the cash, and move into the city. I need to be closer to the office if I'm going to make VP this year." "The house isn't for sale," I said. I didn't even look up from my book. "I wasn't asking," she said, her voice rising. "I'm your wife. We are a team, and as the one who actually has a career trajectory, I'm making a strategic decision for our future. I've already signed the preliminary paperwork for the listing." "With whose signature?" I asked. She paused. "What? Whose signature did you use on the listing agreement? Because it wasn't mine, and I'm the only one on the deed." She laughed, but it was shaky.
I have power of attorney, remember, for the family stuff? No, you don't. I revoked that the day after the barbecue, and even if you had it, you can't use it to sell an asset held in a separate trust for your own personal gain. That's called self-dealing. It's a breach of fiduciary duty. She stood up, her face contorted. Who the hell have you been talking to? Is it that woman across the street? I knew it. You're sleeping with her. You're trying to screw me out of my own home. It was never your home. It was my grandfather's. And you didn't just try to sell it. You tried to forge a HELOC. You opened 3 cards in my name. You stole $40,000 from your company's marketing budget to invest with a con artist in Chicago. Should I keep going, or do you want to wait for the police? The silence that followed was heavy. She didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She did exactly what the neighbors said she would do. She doubled down on her entitlement. I deserved that money, she screamed. She grabbed a heavy glass vase from the side table, one I'd bought her for our anniversary, and smashed it onto the floor. I've spent 12 years tied to a man who has no drive. I had to do everything. I had to make us look successful. I did all the work, so I get the reward. You're just a parasite who happened to inherit a house. The police are on their way, I said quietly. I called them 10 minutes ago, and before you try to tell them I hit you, you should know that the new security system I installed last week, it records audio. It just caught your entire confession. She lunged at me. She actually tried to claw my face. I just backed away, keeping my hands up. I didn't touch her. I didn't have to. The cameras were rolling, and the neighbor was standing on her own porch across the street, filming the whole thing through the front window. The next hour was a blur of blue lights and sirens. Because the amount she had attempted to steal through the HELOC exceeded the threshold for grand larceny, and because she had actually used my identity to open credit lines, the officers had no choice. They handcuffed her in our driveway. Our neighbors, the ones she wanted to impress so badly, were all out on their porches. They watched as the ambitious marketing director was stuffed into the back of a cruiser while screaming about how I was a boring loser who would regret this. The legal battle that followed was intense. She tried every dirty trick in the book. She hired a pricey lawyer with money she didn't have, claiming that the stress of my lack of ambition had caused a mental breakdown that led to her mistakes. She tried to sue the neighbor for alienation of affection. She even tried to claim that the trust was invalid because my grandfather hadn't been in his right mind when he wrote it 30 years ago. It didn't work. In the state of California, where we lived, the laws regarding financial fraud and separate property are very clear. Because I had the paper trail of her trying to sell the house behind my back, and because the neighbor, who turned out to be a very respected attorney in the community, provided a detailed deposition of my wife's illegal inquiries, the judge was merciless. The divorce was granted on the grounds of irreconcilable differences, but the financial settlement was a total victory for me. She was held 100% liable for all the debt she had accrued in my name. I also helped facilitate the paying back of the $40,000 she had borrowed from her company's marketing budget by providing the evidence to her HR department. I didn't feel bad about it. She would have let me go to jail for her debts if it meant she could keep her designer bags. The final blow came during the asset division. Because she had tried to defraud the marital estate, the judge awarded me the entirety of our joint savings account to cover my legal fees. She walked away with nothing but her clothes and a felony record for identity theft and forgery. A few months later, I was sitting on my porch. The house was quiet. No more screaming about image or status. I was drinking a coffee and watching the sunset. The neighbor walked across the street. She wasn't carrying a legal briefcase this time. She was carrying a bottle of bourbon. "How's the unambitious life treating you?" she asked, sitting on the steps. "I'd say it's peaceful," I said. "I just finished a freelance contract that paid more than my wife's annual salary. I did it in my pajamas. Don't tell the neighborhood." She laughed. "Your secret is safe with me. You know, she's working at a retail store at the mall now. I saw her last week. She tried to tell me she was consulting for them on their branding, but she was wearing a name tag and folding sweaters. I hope she's the most ambitious sweater folder they ever had," I said. We sat there in silence for a while. I realized then that I hadn't been low maintenance for all those years. I had just been waiting for the right person to notice that I was the one holding the foundation together.
My wife wanted to trade because she thought I was the weak link. She didn't realize that when you trade away the person who pays the bills, keeps the peace, and knows the law, you're not trading up, you're just selling your own floor out under your feet. I kept the house, I kept my peace, and I kept my lack of ambition, which has currently allowed me to retire at 34 while she figures out how to pay off $150,000 in debt on a retail wage. It's funny how things work out. She wanted a husband with a bigger title. Now she's got her own title, defendant. If you liked seeing a houseplant husband grow some thorns
and prune the dead weight, subscribe for more. My ex-wife says I'm low maintenance, but I promise my content is high reward. Should I tell you about the time her business partner tried to show up at my house to collect his investment next? Subscribe our channel if you want more stories like this.